This video is sponsored by Audio-Meeker, manufacturers of the interconnects and speaker cables used by a British audiophile. For more information about these and their other products, please click the link in the description. Another retro-looking speaker. I have to say I really like the look of the Wharfedale Super Dentons, even though I'm not entirely convinced about this vintage speaker revival. I'm on board with why people buy records and turntables. It's not only the physical interaction with the media. If you spend anything north of about £1,000 on a deck with a decent cartridge, you're going to have a challenge to get a digital setup to sound as natural. Vinyl may be considered by some to be a format from a bygone era, but the reality is it's never really gone away, especially as a high-end music source. But speakers based on designs from the 60s and 70s, that's a different story. Back then, speakers had wide front baffles to accommodate large woofers. Wattage was still a premium in the 1970s, even though transistor-based amplification was widely available. Although I imagine many people were still using valve amplification with high sensitivity speakers, so large cabinet volumes would have been a necessity. Over the years, I've heard some fantastic demos of high sensitivity speakers driven by valve amplification, but as far as I can remember, each and every one of them were pretty expensive. Today, there's a whole host of speakers out there with retro designs at much lower price points. Most of them don't sound that good to me. They sound exactly as their large boxy designs would suggest, coloured, lacking detail, and with mediocre stereo imaging. And that's why you don't see many of them reviewed on this channel. But Peter Comeau, who heads up the acoustic division of the IAG portfolio of brands, is a designer I respect. He has a stellar track record and did an excellent job with the £1,800 quad Revela ones that I recently reviewed and retained as a reference. So, are the new Wharfedale Super Dentons just another one of those retro looking and sounding speakers that will fill you with warm and cosy feelings of the past? Or is there more to them than that? The new Super Dentons are inspired by the original Wharfedale Denton 3s that had a production run from 1971 to 1974. At the time, it was claimed that they were the smallest three-way speakers on the market. Barring dual concentric designs, I think the Super Dentons may live up to that claim today, measuring 360 by 246 by 275 millimeters and weighing 9.2 kilograms. Imperial measurements are 14.2 by 9.7 by 10.8 inches and 20.3 pounds. The cabinets are hand finished in a real walnut wood veneer of a quality that you simply don't find on speakers that retail for £999. A real wood mahogany and black oak finish are also available. The speakers have been designed to be listened to with the grills on to help with edge diffraction issues. However, removing the traditional looking open weave grille reveals three drivers that are anything but retro looking. The 165mm 6.5 inch woofer with a woven Kevlar cone handles bass duties down to a claimed 40 Hz minus 6 decibel point or 52 Hz at minus 3 dB. That's pretty low for speakers of this size. It impressively features a die-cast chassis which is much stiffer than the cheaper press chassis that you typically find on drivers in this price range. At 940 Hz, mid-frequencies are handed to a 50mm 2-inch silk dome mid-range unit. It's offset to one side in order to help disperse edge diffractions that can be a greater issue with wide front baffle speakers. The architecture of the mid-range driver is heavily based upon the unit found in Wharfedale's Evo range of three-way speakers, which were very well received. The tweeter is also offset and takes over from 4600 Hz. The 25mm 1-inch soft fabric dome appears to be made from an identical material to the mid-range dome. That should help to get a better tonal match between the two drivers. This is a new driver with trickle-down technology from the Dovedale speakers that currently sit at the top of Wharfedale's heritage range. There's a ceramic motor system and a rear chamber that's supposed to drive resonances below the crossover frequency. It's nice to see one set of reasonable quality speaker binding posts at the rear. The twin ports help with bass extension, but also assist the Super Dentons to achieve a sensitivity of 87 decibels into a 6 ohm load. Minimum impedance drops down to 3.4 ohms, which means going off IEC industry standards, the Super Dentons should truly be rated as a 4.25 ohm load. How these speakers sound very much depends on how you set them up in your room and your partnering equipment, so I can't really separate out the setup and partnering equipment section on this occasion. I'll integrate it into what I say here. Peter Comeau has clearly voiced the Super Dentons to have a particular type of sound. All the Wharfedale heritage speakers I've heard appear to have that vintage vibe about their sonic delivery. The Super Dentons are no different. Bass is surprisingly weighty and extended, but a little soft. If you're looking for amazing note-to-note definition, these are not the speakers for you, but it did allow me to have the Wharfedales a little closer to the walls than normal. The trade-off was very little in terms of bass agility, but a worthwhile gain in terms of bass depth and thump. The Super Dentons may not have had me marvelling in the texture and tone of a double bass, but they certainly got my toes tapping. I usually have my speakers about 1.8 meters apart and sit approximately 2.5 meters away. That's about 6 and 8 feet respectively. But the Super Dentons sounded a bit thick in the lower mid-range when placed in my conventional location. It was especially noticeable with chesty male vocals, so I moved the speakers a little further apart where the tonal balance and lower mid clarity was much better. I eventually settled on them just over 2 meters or 7 feet apart. A bit of a departure here and a mini tutorial on speaker positioning. It not only affects soundstage imaging and clarity, but can also be viewed as tone adjustments. The closer the speakers are placed to walls, the more bass energy you receive. Of course, you do trade a little bit of bass definition for that. And the distance between the speakers, well, that's an adjustment to the lower mid-range. The closer the speakers are to each other, the thicker the lower mid-range will sound. And the converse is also true. As for upper mid-range and treble frequencies, that's adjusted by the tone angle. If you want maximum energy, you'll have the speakers towed in directly at your ears and you're boosting up those frequencies. I think most of you are going to wind up with the Super Dentons in a similar position to me, and that's with the speakers towed in directly pointing at your ears, because there is a little bit of a dip in the presence region, which is typically between 2 and 4,000 Hertz. The Super Dentons have been tuned to sound relaxed but with plenty of rhythmic drive, thanks to a bass that's full with acceptable articulation, a nicely saturated lower mid-range and a subtly recessed presence region. There's nothing recessed about the treble though. Upper harmonics and things like cymbal hits are well expressed for speakers in this class. It begs the question of whether the Super Dentons sound better with the grills on or off. Even though they've been designed to be listened to with the grills on, no grill is totally acoustically transparent. The grill helps to reduce edge diffraction, mainly caused by the lip that runs along the perimeter of the front baffle. With the grills on, there's a subtle veiling and attenuation of the upper mid-range and treble frequencies, but also a little less graininess to the sound. It's not dramatic enough for there to be a clear winner with either configuration, so I think it's a case of just experimenting and see what you prefer with your room and your partner equipment. As for the soundstaging abilities of the Super Dentons, they're impressive. The soundstage is wide and deep, but there is some vagueness to the location of performers within that large landscape. If clean and precise is what you're looking for, then the Monitor Audio Silver 100s remain the most articulate speakers I've encountered in the sub £1,000 category. The Monitor Audios couldn't be more different in the way in which they present music and how they should be set up in your room. The Super Dentons need to be closer to walls, wider apart and towed in directly towards your ears to sound their best. As for the Silver 100s, they need to be kept away from walls, closer to each other and pretty much firing straight down the room. That's because they edge towards bright and listening off axes helps to temper their enthusiasm on top, but at distance from room boundaries, the Silver 100s can exhibit exquisite timing that's unrivaled from sub £1,000 speakers in my experience. The Monitor Audios delve significantly deeper into recordings, the image is more focused, but whatever I do with setup and partnering equipment, there still remains a little bit of coolness to their presentation. They can also punish poor recordings and partnering equipment that isn't up to scratch. The Super Dentons in comparison are a lot more forgiving in their nature. There may be less detail, but the information that is presented is done in a richer, more laid-back fashion. These two sets of speakers may compete in the same market segment, but they will appeal to two very different sets of listeners. The Dali Opticon 2s retail for an identical price to the Super Dentons, £1 less than £1,000. They offer a bit more resolution and a more natural sounding mid-range, but they won't dig as low or produce the same dynamic fireworks. The Acoustics 5020s may be compact, but are hugely impressive speakers for just under £600. They're a little cleaner and more even-handed in their tonal delivery than the Wharfedales. I can see why the Super Dentons are £400 extra though. I think the real wood veneer is worth a couple of £100 over the vinyl wrap of the Acoustic 5020s and the Dali Opticon 2s for that matter. Also, size matters. The Super Dentons being larger speakers naturally have more bass, but also less dynamic compression. They may present less information than the 5020s and the Opticon 2s, but the information that is presented is done so in a more effortless manner. A consequence of the Wharfedale Heritage speaker's distinct sound is that some care needs to be taken with amplification. The Cambridge Audio AXA35 exaggerated traits that needed to be kept in balance. The bass sounded too soft, and that thickness in the mid-range that I was able to eradicate with speaker positioning was back. I wouldn't pair these speakers with overly warm-sounding amplifiers. My Exposure 2510 is a lot more powerful, resolving, and expensive than the Cambridge Audio AXA35. It normally has just the right dose of romanticism to draw you into the music, but the synergy was off here. It sounded okay, but I wasn't getting the best out of the Super Dentons, and I was even further from getting the best out of my Exposure 2510. I think you need amplifiers with a cooler presentation. I bet they sound great with Audiolab amps. In fact, IAG that own both brands, I suspect, have tuned these retro Wharfedale speakers to work precisely with Audiolab amplification. But the 6000A and 7000A that I reviewed went back ages ago. What was at hand was my Iota VX SA3. It has many similarities to the Audiolab 6000A. At £449, it could be considered a cheaper version, but with an inferior DAC and a little less detail and refinement. The Iota VX SA3 shares the Audiolab 6000A's slimmer mid-range tone and great ability to drive speakers given the moderate price of the amp. It kept the bass lines in check and pulled the mid-range closer towards neutral of the Super Dentons. My only criticism was a little bit of lack of refinement in the higher frequencies, but nothing to complain about given the price. I've recently swapped out KT88 tubes for PS Vane replica vintage Philips EL34s on my Willsenton R8. This is another set of speakers where this configuration of the R8 has hit the mark, where other amps have failed. The R8 has a bit of spiciness to its presentation while still remaining rich and big sounding. It played really well to the attributes of these Wharfedale Heritage speakers. The bass was authoritative, the mid-range was lush, and that presence region was brought up just enough to be engaging but not fatiguing. Okay, I've covered quite a bit in this section. Time to wrap things up. I suspect people will be attracted to the Wharfedale Super Dentons by how they look as much as how they sound. There's no denying that they're beautifully finished and a tasteful nod to vintage speakers of the past. Sonically, they're going to divide opinion. There are less coloured and more resolving speakers available for the price. Also, some care needs to be taken with setup and partnering equipment. Hopefully I've covered that in this video. But I think the Super Dentons deliver exactly what Peter Comeau intended them to. That is a little speaker with a big personality. The bass kicks, the mid-range is rich and relaxed, and it's all presented on a large canvas with good levels of detail. They're a lot of fun to listen to. The Wharfedale Super Dentons get recommended from this channel. It's been quite a long time since we covered this topic, so my question for today is, what are your thoughts and experiences on vintage audio and retro looking speakers, either old stuff or stuff that looks like old stuff? Please let me know in the comment section. I'm sure you know what to do now if you want to support me in what I do. Like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification. Check me out on Patreon. There's a couple of consultancy tiers you can access there if you think I can help you on your audiophile journey. Also check out the ABA Club on Patreon for some great ways to interact with me and fellow patrons. But for today, for now, British Audiophile, signing off.